Two men who once stood shoulder to shoulder in Nigeria's biggest opposition movement are now asking the same question about each other. Who's the real betrayer? Kenneth Okonkwo was Peter Obi's voice on national television throughout the 2023 campaign. Today, he's spokesperson for Atiku Abubakar, and he's facing an 8 billion naira defamation suit from the man he used to defend. Okonkwo isn't backing down. He's calling the lawsuit frivolous, calling himself the one who was actually betrayed, and reminding Obi publicly of the time he defended him against a sitting state governor. So what actually happened here, and who has the stronger case, legally and politically? Let's get into it. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Naija Insight Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. To understand this fight, you have to understand what these two men used to be to each other. Kenneth Okonkwo served as spokesperson for Peter Obi's Labour Party Presidential Campaign Council throughout the 2023 election, one of the most visible and vocal defenders of Obi's candidacy on national Nigerian television. That relationship formally ended in July 2024, when Okonkwo publicly announced he was no longer speaking for Obi, citing what he called a lack of decisiveness. Both men later left the Labour Party and joined the African Democratic Congress before Obi defected again, this time to the Nigerian Democratic Congress, where he's now the 2027 presidential candidate. Okonkwo, meanwhile, was named spokesperson for Atiku Abubakar's 2027 ADC campaign in early July. The legal dispute traces back to comments Okonkwo made on Channels Television's Sunrise Daily program on June 8, 2026. According to court documents, Okonkwo alleged that Obi and certain NDC leaders in the southeast collected money. Reports cite figures around 10 million naira from aspirants seeking National Assembly tickets during the party's candidate selection process, and that the exercise was manipulated. He further claimed Obi personally compiled candidate lists from a hotel room in Abuja. Obi's legal team filed a defamation suit at Anambra State High Court in Onitsha in June, seeking 8 billion naira in damages, 5 billion in general damages, plus additional relief, along with a public retraction and a permanent injunction barring Okonkwo from repeating the claims. Court documents show Obi's team obtained permission for substituted service after personal service attempts reportedly failed, with documents to be delivered to Okonkwo's last known residence in Nsukka, Enugu State. Let's separate what's actually happening here at the institutional level, because this is, at its core, a civil defamation case moving through Nigeria's court system, not a political or criminal matter. The Anambra State High Court, Onitsha Judicial Division, is where this case sits. The court authority here is straightforward: assess whether Okonkwo's public statements meet the legal threshold for defamation, and if so, determine appropriate damages. The court has already made one procedural ruling, granting Obi's team leave to serve Okonkwo through substituted means, specifically at his Nsukka residence, after affidavits indicated personal service had failed. Where it gets contested is Okonkwo's own account of that service. He's publicly stated he has not received court documents and says he only learned of the suit through social media, while also questioning the legitimacy of the substituted service application itself, arguing Obi's team hadn't sufficiently demonstrated failed personal service attempts. This is worth flagging clearly. Whether substituted service was properly executed is a live procedural question, not yet settled, and it's Okonkwo's position that it wasn't done correctly. What the defamation claim actually requires under Nigerian law is that Obi's team demonstrate the statements were false, damaging to his reputation, and made with the requisite standard of fault. Okonkwo's defense, as he's articulated it publicly, rests on claiming he relied on identifiable sources and possesses documentary evidence, a defense that, if substantiated, could significantly complicate Obi's case. None of this has been tested in court yet.
Okonkwo has 42 days from being properly served to enter an appearance or risk judgment being entered against him in his absence.
This dispute isn't happening in a vacuum. It's unfolding at the exact moment Nigeria's opposition landscape is realigning ahead of 2027. Okonkwo's timing is notable. He went public with his sharpest comments about Obi within days of being named Atiku's spokesperson. That's not a coincidence worth ignoring. A former Obi loyalist turned Atiku's public voice, actively undermining Obi's credibility on the exact subject, candidate selection integrity, that opposition unity conversations depend on, serves Atiku's campaign directly. It reinforces a narrative that NDC's internal processes are compromised, right as NDC and ADC are, in theory, competing for the same anti-incumbency vote. For Obi, the strategic calculation behind filing suit is harder to read charitably in political terms, even if it's legally justified. Suing a former ally for defamation risks reinforcing exactly the narrative Okonkwo is pushing, that Obi is thin-skinned, indecisive under pressure, or unwilling to face public scrutiny of his internal party processes. Okonkwo himself is making this argument explicitly, noting Obi never took legal action against harsher critics elsewhere. Who benefits from this dragging on publicly? Almost certainly Atiku's ADC campaign. Every week this stays in headlines is a week NDC's internal candidate selection process stays under a credibility cloud, right as Obi is trying to consolidate the opposition coalition around his and Kwankwaso's ticket. Now, if what you just heard challenges what you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I want to hear your read on this before we get to the part that reframes everything. Step back from the personalities, and this story raises a real question about how Nigeria's opposition manages internal dissent. For opposition unity heading into 2027, this is now the second major internal opposition rupture playing out publicly and legally in recent months, a pattern that raises legitimate questions about whether Nigeria's opposition coalition can present a credible, unified front against the ruling party, or whether internal fractures will keep surfacing as legal battles rather than being resolved politically. For public trust in candidate selection processes broadly, Okonkwo's underlying allegation that National Assembly tickets were effectively sold during NDC's selection process is a serious claim that goes beyond personal grievance. Whether or not it holds up legally, it feeds into broader public skepticism about how Nigerian political parties select candidates, an issue that predates and outlasts this particular feud. For ordinary Nigerians watching from outside the political class, this can look like elite infighting disconnected from their daily concerns. But candidate selection integrity directly shapes who ends up on the ballot in 2027, which makes Okonkwo's underlying claim, separate from the personal betrayal narrative, worth taking seriously on its own terms. For the diaspora audience who followed the 2023 Obedient movement closely, Okonkwo was one of its most recognizable television voices. His public break from Obi, now escalating into a defamation suit, will land differently in diaspora communities than in Nigeria itself, where much of the Obedient movement's energy was built on a sense of generational anti-establishment unity. Watching that unity fracture into a courtroom battle is likely to generate real disillusionment among diaspora supporters who invested emotionally in that 2023 narrative. This also connects to a broader pattern across African opposition movements, where charismatic, personality-driven coalitions built rapidly around a single figure often struggle to manage internal dissent once that figure consolidates a party structure. It's a dynamic diaspora observers have watched play out in multiple countries, and this fight is in some ways a live case study in that tension. Let's steelman both sides properly, because the comment sections on this story are almost certainly going to split hard along existing political loyalties. The strongest case for Obi, if the allegations Okonkwo made on national television are false, they are not minor criticism. There is specific, serious claim of financial corruption in candidate selection, made by someone with real public credibility from his years as Obi's spokesperson. If untrue, that's genuinely reputationally damaging, and Nigerian defamation law exists precisely to provide recourse in cases like this.
filing suit isn't automatically bad faith. It can be a legitimate response to a serious, specific public allegation. The strongest case for Okonkwo, he's pointing to an inconsistency that's hard to dismiss. Obi has faced considerably harsher public criticism from other figures without pursuing legal action, which raises a fair question about why this particular set of claims triggered an 8 billion naira suit. If Okonkwo genuinely has documentary evidence and identifiable sources, as he claims, that is substantive defense, not just rhetorical one. The most common misconception forming online that this is simply a case of a sore loser attacking Obi, or alternatively, that Obi is definitely trying to silence a critic. Neither framing is established yet. This is an active legal case with a real substantive allegation at its center. Reducing it to pure personality conflict skips past the actual question the court will have to resolve, where Okonkwo's specific claims about the candidate selection process, true or false.
3 things to watch in the coming weeks. First, whether Okonkwo is properly served and how he responds within his 42-day window. If he fails to enter an appearance, judgment could be entered against him by default, a very different outcome than if this goes to a full hearing on the merits. Second, watch whether Okonkwo produces the documentary evidence and identifiable sources he is publicly claimed to have. If he does, this shifts from a personality dispute into a genuine test of NDC's candidate selection integrity. If he doesn't or can't, that significantly strengthens Obi's position. Third, watch how this affects opposition coalition talks. If Atiku's camp continues amplifying Okonkwo's claims, expect NDC-ADC relations to cool further heading into 2027 alliance conversations, a dynamic worth tracking alongside the legal proceedings themselves. This escalates if Okonkwo's claims about the 10 million naira ticket allegations gain independent corroboration from other NDC aspirants. That would transform this from a defamation dispute into a genuine internal party scandal. It de-escalates if the parties settle privately, which happens often in Nigerian political defamation cases once the initial public positioning has run its course. So, who's the real betrayer? Based on what's verifiable right now, that's not actually the most useful question to be asking. The more important one is whether Okonkwo's underlying allegation about NDC's candidate selection process holds up, because that's the claim with real consequences for Nigerian voters, independent of who owes whom personal loyalty. We're leaving one thread open deliberately: whether Okonkwo is able to produce the evidence he says he has once this reaches a substantive hearing. That's the moment this story stops being a war of public statements and starts being a real legal test. And that's the video we'll bring you when it happens. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.